In this video, I'm going to show you how to do the slip stitch selvage edge. Let's take a look one more time at an edge, a selvage edge of a knit piece, which has a cast on row and a bind off row. The selvage edge is what is on either side of the work, and its formation happens as you knit. When we don't do anything to the selvage edge, we end up having what looks like little bumps in our work if we're just knitting and purling and moving our yarn as we go. In contrast to that, let me show you, this is a slip stitch selvage edge, and it's characterized by this chain of V's along the edge. And this is very good for anywhere where you're going to see this edge. Let's say on the edge of, the front of a cardigan, or if you're making a blanket. This is really clean and neat, and it's very easy to achieve. So if you want to knit along with me with a tutorial, you'll need a set of knitting yarns, ball of yarn, and you will find it helpful to have a handy little slip marker. Can you see it? This is the kind that you can take on and off. It's like a little safety pin. So we'll keep that handy. To start with, I'm going to cast on probably 9 stitches. We'll just use a twist knot or a slip knot to start with. You can use any method for casting on that you want, but for the sake of demonstration, we'll go this route. It works best on doing the slip stitch edge if you have a knit at either end, a knit stitch. So we're going to do a cast on row, and we'll do 1 row of the purl, knit, purl, ribbing, and then we'll begin with the actual method. So I'm just casting on a simple long tail cast on, 4 and 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. This will allow us to have a knit stitch on either edge, and let me double count: 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Okay, getting the tail out of the way. We're going to start with purl 1, knit 1, so that when we begin our work, this will all become a little more clear to you. And this is part of a ribbing series, and so I've chosen to do rib stitch, but this would work with any time that you have a selvage edge. All right, so knit 1, or purl 1, I know what I'm doing. Knit, and that was a purl and a knit. Must be one of those days. Trying to split my yarn too. Check the links down below, because I will be doing a lot with ribbing as a part of a series, and in that I will also show you a really good hack for a tubular cast on that will mimic the look of the ribbing. All right, so first of all, we want to distinguish that on the front side of the work, the side of the work where we have a knit stitch at either end facing us, we'll call this the right side of the work. And typically when I'm doing this, I like to put a stitch marker on the side of the work in which I'm doing the slip stitch. It just helps me to remember, but I want to get a row or two in before I put this on, otherwise it will be in the way of my knitting. So quite simply, to do the slip stitch row, you are going to slip the first stitch and the last stitch as if you were knitting. So you insert your needle like you were going to knit. It goes in through the left hand side of the stitch, and we just take it off. And then continue in pattern, which in this case is knitting and purling, until we get to the last stitch. Moving right along. Knit, purl. Now here, when you are slipping the last stitch of the row, move your yarn to the back. You don't want to have another wrap around that needle. So again, we insert our needle like we were going to knit and just slip it off and turn our work. And it's on this side of the row, or this side of the knitting, that we will purl every slip stitch. And this is why I set it up as I did, with an odd number. So we just purl the stitch that we slipped. I want to make sure I'm not splitting my yarn. And do be aware that because of the way we slipped our yarn to the back, it's very easy to pull this second stitch off. In addition, if you want to increase the tension of that slip stitch at all, it's on this second stitch. The first stitch doesn't have anything on the right side here to tension it. If you find that your slip stitch is looking a little bit loose, just as you've mounted this next stitch, just give a little tug, but you shouldn't have any problems. And we continue in pattern, this 1x1 ribbing, until we get to the last stitch. Almost there. We have a knit stitch, and as always on this side, we purl the last stitch. And again, if you're finding anything loose on your slip stitch as you work up the row, go ahead and adjust it on that second stitch, and we turn our work. Now at this point, you will think that you do have too much looseness. This is normal and it does resolve itself. So I'm going to place my stitch marker just to remind myself that this is the side where I'm slipping stitches. We all get distracted and feel like, sometimes we've lost where we are. Although it should be obvious, it's just really a good little helpful hint. So this is the side where we slip that first stitch as if to knit it. Now since I feel like perhaps that little loop is just a little loose, it's on this second stitch, I just give a little extra tug and continue on. So front side or right side is slip as if to knit the first stitch and last stitch, and on the wrong side you purl those slipped stitches. Right side slip, and again at the end of the row, yarn to the back, slip as if to knit, turn your work. And that's really all there is to the slip stitch edge. I'll go ahead and finish this row. On this side we purl that slip stitch, and we're careful not to pull this second stitch off. If we feel like tightening up that loop, right here is that point, and we just continue in this manner until we have reached our desired length. I will say, if you are slip stitching your selvage edge, when you are going to bind off, you will want to have prepared in advance. And on the last right side, before you get to your bind off, you'll want to actually work this first stitch. With it being slipped, the bind off won't be quite as neat. So once you've worked more of your work, just go ahead and plan ahead to work that very last row, similarly to how we did our first row here when we cast on. So you can see, I hope, this V form, these chains forming on either end, except where we did our first row. On that space, just right here at the very base where we've cast on, is where it won't be that chain. And that's really all there is to the slip stitch edge. Right side, slip the first and last as if to knit. The wrong side, purl each slip stitch. If this video has been helpful to you, go ahead and like it, and if you feel like it, subscribe. I'd love to have you, and you all be safe and healthy, and we'll see you next time on Snowy on Knits.